Okay, welcome everybody to our monthly meeting of the Cahokia Archaeological Society. And our presentation tonight is by Dr. Julie Zimmerman, who's the chairman of the anthropology department at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. And as you can see here, she's going to talk about your standing on native land. We all are. 10,000 years of Native American life at SIU Edwardsville. She'll be talking primarily about the field schools and work her students have been doing at the Gehring Site, which is on the campus down in the floodplain below the bluffs, and where they found all kinds of neat things that she's going to inspire us with here. Julie.
Thank you. First of all, I want to apologize. When I was a little kid, we'd watch old movies with my dad, and, like an hour and a half into it, he'd suddenly go, I've seen this before. And we thought that was crazy, but now I'm there. And so I know when I spoke to you guys a year or so ago, I went home later and I thought, oh my gosh, I talked about storytelling Cahokia, the winter series lecture. So I'm going to say, I'm sure I've given this lecture to you guys before, but I've thrown a few new things in here, and I'm sure you've forgotten whatever I said. So we've all forgotten. I think it'll be fine. So if you actually remember, I'm sorry for you. Okay. So yes, I want to say Dr. Koyman, Susan Koyman is the new archaeologist at SIUE. She's just up for she'll be tenured on July 1st, when I'm happy to tell you I will no longer be the department chair. And so she's been teaching field school since she arrived on campus, 2019. Actually, she was going to teach field school for the first time in the summer of 2020, and you know how that went. So it was canceled and rescheduled for summer of 2021. So she's been teaching it since, and I hope that she will continue teaching it, because my goal is to, before I retire, publish what I've done. So I'm going to talk about that today. Anyway, so we were just asked by SIUE's lifelong learning program to, we were both separately asked to give archaeology talks, and we're like, my gosh, how much new stuff. I mean, we just talked last year, how much new stuff. We can't just keep digging new stuff all the time. So we decided to do a tag team talk last week on campus. We did it on Zoom because of the snow, but most of, I'm going to say 90% of the slides that you're going to see in here are from work that I've done, and then I'm going to put her new stuff in there as well, or she put it in there. All right. So if you have questions, by all means, just holler out. I'll be happy to answer them as we go on. So first, I want to do the land acknowledgement, and I don't know if I can read it from here. I cannot. So I want to say land acknowledgement is people acknowledgement. I'm sure everybody in this room knows what I'm talking about, but people who are watching at home probably don't. And so different organizations, it's really ramped up in the last 5 years or so, doing land acknowledgments for their institutions, honoring the Native Americans who were here before us and whose descendants are still alive today. And I don't know, honestly, why they call this land acknowledgement, because it really should be people acknowledgement. So I'm going to read our people acknowledgement statement. If I can look at it this way. Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville exists in and serves a region that includes the lands of the Kickapoo, that's the Kickapoo, Treaty in Edwardsville, 1819, the Illinois Confederacy, including the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Michigamia, Cahokia, and Tamaroa, Treaty in Edwardsville, 1818, and today they're represented by the Peoria in Oklahoma, the Diggiasuan peoples, and others. We affirm their contemporary and ancestral ties to the land and their contributions to this place. In alignment with the academic mission of the institution, we are committed to building responsible relationships with indigenous communities through the development of educational pathways and opportunities for indigenous students and the advancement of research and knowledge about indigenous peoples, cultures, and histories. So this is the land acknowledgement statement that the Native American Studies faculty at SIU Edwardsville developed. There's a somewhat different statement. Carbondale made one around the same time, and I know Cahokia has worked on their statement, and I don't think it's live on Facebook yet, but it'll happen maybe someday. All right. And I'm going to come back to this at the end. So those were the groups that were known historically and broadly before Europeans showed up in the Edwardsville area. All right, so the SIUE campus, I'm sure most of you in here are familiar with it, has 2,600 acres, the second largest college campus in the United States, and being 20 minutes from Cahokia Mounds, we have lots of archaeological sites on campus. So we've been doing field school at the Gehring Site. I started working there in the summer of 2009. This is the Gehring Site here. 11M, oops, sorry, back. I cannot see where my arrow is. Okay. Thank you. Oh, there he goes. Okay. So this is 11 MS-99 here, was reported in the 1960s when Patrick Munson and Alan Harn were sent by the Illinois State Museum to do this massive survey of the American Bottoms and Wood River Terrace. And so they recorded a number of sites on campus, and this is one of the bigger ones. So first reported in the 1960s, and they called it the Gehring, so that means it's the 99th site that was reported for Madison County. And they called it the Gehring Site because Wilbur Gehring was still farming it at that time, and he had been the landowner before SIUE bought the land in the decade or so before that. All right. So Sid Denny came along in the early 1970s when the anthropology department was very young, and he was also very young, and he did his field school there for several years. And you can see he brought this little road grader out. We don't use road graders on our field schools anymore, but he wasn't shy about it. So he brought this little road grader out, and he was out there 2 or 3 summers, and they found stuff. Okay. I'm sorry to tell you, he didn't write a report, so I can't give you a lot of details about what they found. I should have mentioned that when Munson and Harn reported this as a site, they reported multiple components at the site, but in the if you read the report that's published in this book, they refer to it primarily as a Havana village and mound, and they also mention a Mississippian component as well. So Sid came along and said that he didn't think that there was much there. But I'm looking at decades later, I'm looking at the features that he dug, and there are like whole burnt corn cobs and stuff. And I'm like, where'd all this stuff go? So he did find Mississippian stuff, and he did find Hopewell stuff, but he was unimpressed. So he found other places to go dig. So when I came out in the summer of 2009, I'll show you. I had him come out to visit the site with me. Summer of 2009, we surveyed this entire field. Lori Belknap is right here. Lori Belknap was my GA that summer. Sorry. Right there's Lori. They're recording the artifacts we're finding with GPS. So I was department chair at that time already, so that was my earlier first 2 terms as chair. So summer of 2009 I was out there, but summers 2010, 11, 12, Greg Vogel came out. I'm not going to say a whole lot about what he found. I'll mention it in brief. And then I was back out there 2013, 14, 16, and 18. And when my term was chair, it was finished. And then I came back in as chair. And so Susan, like I said, has been teaching it since. So I'm going to mostly talk about the stuff that I have found, but I will also mention what collectors have found and what Susan has found as well, and a little bit mention of Greg's. So here we are doing our survey. We did this whole, here's the site compared to what Munson and Harn recorded. I will tell you, we did not go to this is an old, this field road's no trolley line. I'm sure, yeah, Larry's nodding. I'm sure some of you old folks know more about that trolley line than I do, but pretty cool. Anyway, so we didn't go to the north side of the old trolley line because you can see SIUE's got its utilities there now, and it's all messed up. So we didn't even look at that. But we did this whole area that's plowed. This is a soccer field, so we didn't look at that. And so you can see the boundaries of the Gehring Site did not change a whole lot. And I'll mention this is Cahokia Creek here. This used to be called Bluff Road, but is now called Stadium Road. So that is the base of the bluff. So we're in the floodplain of Cahokia Creek in the American Bottom, but you go right up the hill here and you're up into the bluff top and into the uplands. All right, so where you see these red dots, I want to say that's not a single artifact. We started in this corner. That's where that picture was taken. And at first we were recording with the GPS, every single artifact we found, we quickly realized we'd still be there today. So, we started, by the time like you're in this area over here, there were so many artifacts. They had just plowed horseradish, if you can see here, incredible when horseradish is agriculture is very destructive to archaeological sites, it digs deep. And so we had 100% visibility there, pulled all these artifacts up, even as that horseradish was going. It took us, I'm going to say like 6 weeks to do this survey. And even as that horseradish was growing, it was, grows very kind of upright. And so you still had incredible ground visibility. There were artifacts everywhere. Okay. So as a result of that, like some of these red dots you see in here, that was the highest concentration of artifacts. There might be like 100 artifacts for every red dot there. We were actually standing there. I'd have students pick them up and pile them up next to their flag and then go on. So an enormous number of artifacts for each one of those dots. We collected over 30,000 artifacts from the field. And I was thinking, anyway, it was a lot to go through. It took years. It was mostly, I'm going to say, mostly flakes. But I want to point out a couple things here. First of all, you see this big empty spot here. When I went out there that spring before we got started with Sid Denny, again, he had written no report. I can see from the old photographs that they drew maps. I have no idea where those maps went. None of that, the artifacts we still had, they've gone up to the Illinois State Museum. And we did find some notes later, but I don't know where the maps went, and there were, like I said, no report was ever written. So he went out there with me the spring before, and we kind of stood in this area, and he waved his arm and said, yeah, we dug over in here. So this is my explanation for you for this big empty spot, is that's probably where Sid dug. That's my best guess. And I have not gone out there it would be hard to figure out at this point. I will tell you right up front, spoiler, we estimate something like 5 feet of topsoil has been lost since the 1970s when they started doing horseradish agriculture in this field. I'll show you how we know that. A collector told me that, and we see the proof of that in the field. These yellow dots down here, we found Middle Woodland pottery down there, Hopewell, and that's, for those of you who know, that's like 1,000 years older than Cahokia. Everybody in the American bottom, all archaeologists want to do Cahokia and stuff, and I wanted to do Middle Woodland Hopewell. And so we dug down though you see 6 yellow dots there. That's where we put our first 6 test units in the summer of 2009. And we hit some cool Middle Woodland stuff, which I'm going to talk about. Does anybody have any questions about this before I go on? Okay. All right. So, here's your 10,000 years right here. Okay. So, most of that 10,000 years is Native American occupation. This is the oldest artifact found at the site. This is a base of what Brad Koldehoff has called a Folsom-like point. You can see it's fluted. And I'm sure Larry can tell us that is beautiful Fern Glen chert from down around Valmeyer. And so that's the oldest artifact we have found on the site. Technically, that is, I think I would consider it to be late Paleo-Indian. Some people might call it early Archaic, but I would call it late Paleo-Indian. And it's for the American bottom proper. I mean, we're right at the base of the bluff, but Brad told me that he found somebody showed him a similar point that was found up at the foot of the bluff where Wood River comes into the American bottom. So this artifact and that one are the 2 oldest that have been found in, at the not in the uplands, but down in the floodplain. Some 24 at least sites of Paleo-Indian are found in the uplands. But all right, so and this is the jumping forward. This is an example. There are some historic features out in that field as well, and I'm not going to really talk about that because it would take up time that I don't want to talk about it. So this is a cool little maker's mark on this piece of pottery. And my student Jessica Robards did her senior project on this the next year. And she identified this as pearlware, I believe, coming from, she thought, the Peoria Pottery Company or something like that. So you can see it's a little unicorn. It's pretty cool. So, again, when Munson and Harn reported it, they reported it as this Middle Woodland. They called it Havana Village. Havana is named for Havana, Illinois. It's the everyday pottery type. Hopewell is the more ritual ware we'll talk about. And so, yes, we have found Middle Woodland stuff. And I'm going to say probably found more Mississippian stuff than Munson and Harn would have led me to expect. Okay, so you'll see that primarily we've been finding more Mississippian stuff than Middle Woodland stuff. All right, so let's talk about the Middle Woodland stuff first. Some of you will recognize this map by Herb Rowe. He's looking at what we call the Hopewell interaction sphere. The Hopewell site in itself is in Ohio, and Ohio is oftentimes seen as like the center of Hopewell. But Havana Hopewell here in this part of Illinois is also a lot of exchange going on between these areas. To the south of us, the crab orchard culture. Also, these people are mound builders, and they're this map here shows you some of the exotic materials that go back and forth through the Hopewell interaction sphere, such as this is the only time period that that's the only time period that I'm going to say, the only time period you will find obsidian in the state of Illinois. I could offer a footnote to that, but I'm not going to. But most of that obsidian goes past Illinois and ends up over in Ohio. The Hopewell people of Ohio are really into the obsidian, much more so than the people of Illinois. Other materials here supposed to be going long distances. Mica come from the Carolinas. Galena, I think has a broader distribution than what they suggest here, but that is also a material that they like. Quartz, they like shiny stuff during Middle Woodland people did. Copper coming from the Great Lakes. I'm going to say this is wrong, this grizzly bear teeth. There's no proof that they're actually grizzly bear teeth, and we've known that since like the 1970s. They're making necklaces out of like black bear teeth, but black bear are not necessarily coming from over here. Okay. All right. And marine shell coming from the Gulf of Mexico. I'm going to say that again. Marine shells coming from the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah. All right. So, okay, we're here in the American bottom, guess what is right here on this line? We're right between Havana, Hopewell, and Crab Orchard, Hopewell, whereas people in the Illinois Valley and in the Mississippi Valley to the north of us, Mississippi Valley to the south, they're building burial mounds full of exotic trade goods. That is not happening in the American bottom. So what is happening? I'll show you some examples of what is happening here. So this is back to our site map. This little tiny yellow area is the extent of excavations that I had conducted versus circa 2018. And so you can see it's a very tiny, small portion of the site that we've worked on so far. And here is the sum total map for excavations at that end of the site. Greg Vogel was digging up here in the summers that he was digging. Again, I'll mention that briefly, but not in extent. So you can see, some of you will recognize the blue is Mississippian. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But first I'm going to talk about the Middle Woodland, which is what you see in right here. So in the summer of 2009, our first summer out there, we found this Middle Woodland feature. And then I came back in 2013 and we found these two. And I'll tell you about what we found in those. All right, so here's that first feature that we found, feature 102. And I started with feature number 100 or 101 because I had no idea how many features Sid had dug. And if ever somebody could figure out what Sid had dug out there, I didn't want to have duplicate feature numbers. I wanted to make sure that I started way out beyond any number of features that he had found. So I know he found less than 100 features. So I started with feature number 100. And you can see big, beautiful pieces of Middle Woodland pottery coming out of that feature. This kind of like, we've excavated half the feature here, drawn the profile, and then on the other half took out a float sample here, and you can see below that lots of pottery there. And all through that profile, there's pottery sticking out of that wall. And when we got down to the bottom of this feature, you can see it's kind of that, it's actually a yellow sand at the bottom of that. And we were trying to make sure we got to the very bottom of the feature. We dug a little deeper, and a few centimeters into that sand, there was more Middle Woodland pottery. So I'm glad we kept going. And this is the pottery that came out of there. That very bottom sand lens, there was about 25% of a Havana jar down at the bottom of it. And this is Middle Woodland Hopewell red slip zone pottery. This kind of Hopewell pottery is typically found in burial mounds up in the Illinois Valley to the north of us. But the sample that we found here at Gehring is about as much as the entire rest of the American bottom put together. So the model of Middle Woodland occupation in the that comes from Andrew Fortier was that at the beginning of the Middle Woodland period, people are coming from the Illinois Valley and settling in the American bottom. But then at the end of the Middle Woodland, they go back again. But they come down here and they're not building burial mounds. We don't find a lot of the kind of Hopewell trade goods down here that you find in the Illinois Valley. But so for us to be finding this much red slip Hopewell zone pottery on the site is pretty unusual for the American bottom. I know you can't see this very well, but you could if the projection were better. But this is a cross-hatched, also the rim of a Hopewell bowl or jar. I'm not sure which right the second. This is Montezuma punctate, another Middle Woodland Hopewell type, Havana type. So here's a reconstruction of what these pots with, not these particular ones, but these are examples of. This actually is a bowl, not a jar like this. So here's a Havana jar. This is a Hopewell jar with the zoning on it. Again, this would be a bowl, not a jar. So the fact that this was found in the very bottom of that feature might suggest it's a little bit older, this Havana jar, than the Hopewell zone. And Andrew Fortier, when he was reviewing the article that I published later, thought it was also older. But when Ken Farnsworth came that summer, and some of you know Ken Farnsworth is an archaeologist working in the Illinois Valley, I'm going to say since I was in diapers, and which I'm not saying that I've been in diapers recently. I'm talking about like he started his career in the late 1960s, something like that. And so the guy knows more about Middle Woodland ceramics. My specialty is animal bones, okay? So Ken Farnsworth came down and looked at the stuff that we were finding, and he said, this pottery looks just like pottery from the Illinois Valley. It could be pottery from the Illinois Valley. And so I will say we won an NSF grant, got infrared and Raman microscopes to see if we could look at the molecular structure of this clay and figure out, was it really coming from the Illinois Valley versus the American bottom? Was it locally made, or did it really actually come from the Illinois Valley? And the answer is, I still don't know. So it's a chemistry problem that I do not want to talk about ever again. Don't make me look through those microscopes ever again. Okay, so it's the potential is there to figure that out, but I am not the person to do it, is what I have decided. So if I haven't made that clear, then this is the everyday kind of pottery that Middle Woodland Havana people were using to the Illinois Valley to the north of us at the beginning or earlier in the Middle Woodland period, and this is the fancy kind of quote-unquote ritual pottery. All right. Questions? Anybody? Yeah.
So the property that these are occurring at, the digs, it's owned by SIUE.
Mm-hmm.
It's farmed still?
Not since 2012. So I'm happy to tell you, of the 30,000 artifacts that we collected that summer, there were 3 human bone fragments. I'm not happy to tell you there were 3 human bone fragments. Wait, so at the time, I told our administration, like, there are burials out there. We need to stop. You need to stop plowing this now. They were renting it out to a farmer. Some of you have heard of perhaps horseradish agriculture in the American bottom. Keller Farms possibly could have been the farmer on that project. Anyway, so they didn't believe me. Okay, so several years later, when Greg Vogel was out there digging, he proved to them that there was in fact a burial out there, and then they stopped. So it has not been plowed since summer of 2012. Okay. Anyway, so currently I'm going to show you a picture at the end of what it looks like today. Anybody else? Questions? All right. So there's a close-up of one of the red slipped Hopewell zone, that bowl. And these are 2, oh my gosh, Norton, right? Right, Larry? Yeah, Larry's like, whatever. Yeah. Yeah, these are Norton points, Middle Woodland Norton points. This one's been turned into a scraper. Here we have lamellar blades. That's kind of interesting because in the Illinois Valley, the lamellar blades tend to be found on mortuary sites, and there's theories about what they're doing, some kind of mortuary processing of bodies with the blades or something related to mortuary activities. But here in the American bottom, they are not found in mortuary contexts. So they're, thought to be maybe for some other kind of ritual, but not mortuary per se. There are Middle Woodland mounds to the west of us, like lower Missouri Valley. So, maybe they're processing the bodies here and taking them somewhere else. So maybe they are still used in mortuary, but they're not found in mortuary context here. All right. So we came back summer of 2013 and found 2 more Middle Woodland pits there. And here's feature 203. And so now at this point, some of you are going, oh, now I remember. I've seen that little person before. Okay, so here's, oh my gosh, having a Courtney, super excited, pulled up this little human figure here, and little tiny person. We're going to look at a close-up here in a second. And yeah, here's close-up. So front, back, and side. To compare that with similar or other figurines found in Middle Woodland sites, the fancy figurines like this one here found like I think this particular one is from the Night Mound. Oh, help me! Is Night Mound in Illinois Valley or is it actually Mississippian Valley? But it's farther north.
Right across from Campsville on the Mississippi Valley.
Okay. See, I thought it was Illinois Valley all these years, and I think Larry corrected me. So whatever, it's this close to the Illinois Valley, right? Okay. So anyway, you gotta love these beautiful figurines that you find in Middle Woodland mounds. But there's another kind of Middle Woodland figurine found they call Casper the Ghost figurines, and this one's broken off at the base. But you can see why they call them Casper the Ghost, because they have a stump for a head, stumps for arms, and typically a stump for the body. Okay, so this and I don't know how many of these fancy ones have been published, maybe a couple dozen or something like that. Likewise, the Casper the Ghost, I'm going to say probably a couple dozen have been published. Ken Farnsworth tells me he's aware of like over 100 Casper the Ghost figurines, so they're not that uncommon. But whereas these, whereas the fancy ones are found in mounds and burials, buried with people, these Casper the Ghost ones are almost entirely found in habitation context. They are not coming out of mounds. There's one arguably that came out of a kid's burial, but it had facial features and stuff, so it's not a normal one. So likewise, this is not normal, okay? What we have found here is a kind of a hybrid style, and this is the way I see it. It's like they were trying to make one of these, right? So they made the little feet, they look like little babies in their sleepers, little toes, doing this. And when you hold this up to the light and look at it, you can actually see light through this guy's butt crack or the back of his knees or whatever. So it's like somebody was put all this work into the feet and the legs and the butt crack, and then they're like, I'm never going to get it. And so they just finished it as a Casper the Ghost from the waist up. Okay, so it's this weird hybrid of the two styles. And so it didn't come out of a mortuary context. So is it a kid's toy or is it some kind of ritual thing? And the answer is, I do not know. I'm going to tell you, every Native American I've had look at this, laughed and thought it was a kid's toy, thought it was cute because, it's like a little mud doll. All right. But there are some other things that came out of the pit that could point to ritual. So what are they? This is more Hopewell Zone pottery. It's a later style of it. So whereas the previous pit, by the way, I should say, that red Hopewell Zone pottery, the radiocarbon date that came out of that pit is about like AD 100, something like that. And so this, the radiocarbon date that came out of this pit's like AD 200, roughly. Okay, so it is later. And likewise, this is still Hopewell Zone pottery, but it's a later version of Hopewell Zone pottery. This is Bluffdale pottery, this piece here and this piece here. Those are variants of Hopewell, but also, again, a later variant of Hopewell. We still have Havana. This is considered Havana ware, but again, the style is evolving, so it's a later version of Havana ware. And, I'm having a brain fart. What is this? I can't think what this pottery style is called, this stuff here. Does anybody know? You can't see it. It's got rocker stamping on it, but it does, so you're going to have to believe me. All right, and over here you're going, oh my gosh, look at that cool thing. They found that. No, we didn't. We found we found that. Okay, so there's Courtney. She's just found this little figurine, and I'm sitting there on my bucket writing notes because I'm going to write a report. And I'm sitting there taking my notes, and all of a sudden she stands up and she's like, "Dr. Zimmerman, what is this?" And I see a little little flash of light, and it goes flying away on the wind. It goes caught in the wind. It blew away. And I jumped off my bucket and I ran after it, and I found it. It was a little piece of mica. So there was about a teaspoon of mica. So I'd like to tell you that we found that, but we didn't. We found this. And you can get little bits of mica naturally occurring in the soil, but not this much. So again, Ken Farnsworth is down here looking at this stuff as we're digging it up, and he's like, to find a teaspoon of mica, there was something there. And I'm going to say it all came out of that first half of the pit, and then there was a torrential rainstorm, and we found none on the other side. And I'd be willing to bet you what was there melted. Because I mean, you look at this, water touches and it's gone. It's just so fragile. Okay. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? Mica, it's a mineral that occurs in these sheets. So again, Middle Woodland people love shiny stuff, and the mica, to get a sheet like this, the thought is it's coming from the Carolinas, and then they would make it into hand cutouts like the bird, claw that you saw there, or you might see a human hand cut out or something like that. But, so this is not just, yeah, we have some everyday, again, pottery, the Havana. But again, we have Hopewell pottery in here. We've got mica in this pit. And so that points to, well, maybe there is some ritual stuff going on there. So again, is the figurine, is that little clay figure a doll or a ritual thing? I honestly, jury's out on that. I don't know. We'll never know. Okay. All right. And so here's the third pit. So again, this is, again, the first pit, AD 100, second one, AD 200. This is like AD 300. Again, we can see the pottery styles evolving. Before we go on and look at that, I'm going to point out this to you. This feature 214 is actually in the wall over here. And I thought it was at the time, I thought this was a post because it looked like it was right there and ended, and it looked like a post. And you can see there's a disturbance here that we thought was like some kind of hearth dump episode in the top of that feature. But spoiler, it turns out that there's a Mississippian house goes through here, and we didn't discover it until 5 years later. So here's the pottery that came out of that pit. No Hopewell pottery. They're done with that. This is still considered Havana, but it's like Havana variation bottoms or something like that to show that they are now, it's different than the pottery that you would find in the Illinois Valley at this time. Local people are still making similar potteries, but it's somewhat unique to this area. I'm not a pottery expert, but the people who are will say that. Okay. And then again, we have some spear points out of this. This is a Manker on the left and a Snyder's on the right. You can argue with that, Larry? No. Just say yes. Okay. Somebody else identified him, not me. It was probably you. Back then. Okay. Oh, sorry. Wrong with it. All right. So to conclude then, the model coming from Andrew Fortier is he calls this the land between two traditions. We have the Havana tradition to the north of us, crab orchard tradition to the south. They're building mounds in those areas. In the American Bottom, back in the 1990s, oh my gosh, what was his name? This guy did a dissertation. He dug the possible mound at the Gehring Site, and he said it wasn't a mound. Oh my gosh, right? What movie did we watch last week, Larry? Yeah, it's Mayer. George Mayer. George Mayer. M-A-H-E-R. What's his name? Tom. Thank you. Okay. So he did his dissertation and tested all the four possible Middle Woodland mounds in the American Bottom, and none of them turned out to be Middle Woodland, or in the case of Gehring, it does not appear to be a mound. So again, the American Bottom, whereas this is the center of the world for Mississippian period, right? For Mississippian peoples, this is kind of a backwater in the Middle Woodland period. So this model of land between two traditions coming from Fortier, again, he suggests that at the beginning of the Middle Woodland period, people are coming from the lower Illinois Valley, And this is even like 50 years after that, probably looking at the style. So at that point, the people living in Gehring are making pottery, again, looks quote unquote just like pottery come from the Illinois Valley. That's because the people just came from there, right? And then 200 years later, they're still making Havana pottery. They're no longer making Hopewell pottery. And the pottery is still considered Havana style, but it's evolved a little bit. And then there's a period of like 50 years, AD 350 to 400, where the American bottom is abandoned, and it's thought that there's a little flooding going on at that time.
June?
Yes.
What is the surface treatment of that?
This is cord marked.
Cord mark.
Yeah, so there are nodes across the top. If you see those little pimples, those are called nodes, and these are both just cord marked. And then you can see there's a little bit of there's a bevel to the rim that is not found earlier. But it's just sloppier looking, I will say. I mean, when you look, as a non-ceramicist, I just look at them and go, well, this is much nicer looking. It's sturdier. I don't know. This is thinner. But it just looks kind of, the pottery that came out of that last pit just all looks kind of sloppy looking. All right. But again, I want to stress that there's cool stuff that's been coming off that site, not from the stuff we dug up, by the way. But, this, for example, is made of, this is Cobden Dongola from southern Illinois. Middle Woodland people in the Illinois Valley love Cobden Dongola shirt. This is called a North Point. It's basically a Snyder's without the side notching. And, it's, like this big. And like up in the Illinois Valley, they have found caches of thousands of these. Okay. So a guy who collected our site in the 1970s, which to be clear, everybody I hope knows that is illegal. I'm not sure if it was legal in the 1970s. I mean, I don't know if you know, it probably was. But, I told the audience in our talk last week, like, if you know of somebody who has a collection, I know there are more out there. And our goal is not to have people arrested when they're 80. Our goal is to record what they found. And, this guy has kept his collection, right? I recorded it. I published it. It's published in Illinois Archaeology in 2019. But he still has his collection. I'm not sure what he's going to do with it, but he still has it. We're not taking stuff away. We just want to report what was found. So he found this. So that's a considered a kind of a fancier, it's a trade item, right? And the only, there is some other bear, bone I found like in the Kaskaskia Valley somewhere, but in the whereas up in the Illinois Valley, you find like these carnivore tooth necklaces all the time. You don't find stuff like that down here because we don't have burials. But here on our site, he found a bear tooth. You can see it's been drilled to, I don't know why it's got 3 holes in it, but it's got, Larry, any theories about that? I mean, they messed this one up, but why do they need 2 more? I don't know. Okay.
Practicing with micro drills.
On your one bear tooth. It'd be like, your kids, take your stuff and all of a sudden you realize they've been drilling holes in your best bear tooth. Okay. And of course, we can't know for sure that this, for example, that these 2 things came from the Middle Woodland occupation, but they surely did because Middle Woodland people, again, love quartz. This actually was found in one of our surface collection in 2009. That's a lamellar blade that's been turned into a cool little thing. And people like Larry tell me that's a lizard effigy. I'm like, okay, whatever you say. So that's supposed to be a little lizard effigy made on a lamellar blade. There's that mica piece. We have found, again, very little obsidian has been found in the state of Illinois. Most of it goes through Illinois and ends up in Ohio. But at our site, we have found, I think, like 5 flakes out there. And so that they're just flakes, but that's pretty unusual for the American bottom, or for Illinois generally, to be finding that much obsidian. So something, again, unusual going out there. This is from Sid Denny's excavation, a big chunk of galena. And this is from our excavation. It's a copper awl. It was actually found in the plow zone, but my buddy Larry here tells me it is a Middle Woodland style. Are you going to go back on that?
No.
Okay, so these are trade goods. They're not necessarily ritual, but some of them surely were ritual goods. So this is kind of special stuff to be finding for the American bottom. Questions? All right, but what is most special to me? So these are Mississippian houses, right? Like you see at Cahokia, and there have been thousands of these found in the American bottom. But Middle Woodland houses, there have been about 12 found in the American bottom. And I really wanted to find the 13th Middle Woodland house. So whereas Mississippian people built these wall trench structures, Middle Woodland people built these big circular post structures. So I've marked in red here. These I don't actually know for sure are Middle Woodland posts. I just want them to be very much. So they're posts. And what I was really hoping that before I died or retired, we would find the rest of a Middle Woodland house that might be something like this. But I'm going to have to leave that to Susan because I'm done. I'm done digging. Anyway, so there's an example of what one of these posts look like from the side. So yeah, that's it for the Middle Woodland component. Any questions about that? Okay. So let's talk about the Mississippian then. These are Mississippian wall trench structures, and if you know anything about Cahokia, you recognize those immediately. And for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, such as my two students in the back of the room there, Cahokians would dig a big hole in the ground, and it might be several, like a meter deep, several feet deep, okay? And then at the bottom of that hole, they would dig wall trenches and then put the posts for the house up in those wall trenches. All right. And I'm assuming people have a base knowledge of, I've been talking about pits, and if I were talking to people who didn't know anything, I would have explained what pits are. Do I need to explain that? Anyone? Okay. All right. So we've got these Mississippian wall trench structures. This one, we found, Summers dug this, found in summer 2012, finished digging it in summer 2013. And, 13 and 14. And, I already mentioned that this wall trench structure went through that Middle Woodland pit, but we missed it. So we knew something was there, but we didn't recognize what it was when we dug this pit. And then it was coming back, years later. This is when you don't bring out a road grader. It takes a very long time to uncover stuff. And so, my student was working on this little circular pit here, and it was, probably like 10 centimeters deep. And, I answered a phone call, and I went and I came back, and I'm standing there looking down the hole, and he's got to the bottom of it, and all of a sudden there's a wall trench coming through at the bottom of this pit, clear as day. And I'm like, what? Where did that come from? And that was how we realized, that, there was something there. So we, I think it took 2 summers to dig this out and expose the whole thing. So, before I go on, I wanted to say, to conclude Middle Woodland, I did publish the Middle Woodland stuff that we have found so far. So this was published in Illinois Archaeology in the summer of 2018. And, it was 2 years later before the radiocarbon dates got published. So if you want to see there's a smaller article in Illinois Archaeology in the summer in 2020, that reports the radiocarbon dates. But I've published everything that we have found on Middle Woodland so far. Any other questions about that? I think, Gail, you would be interested to know that the pit, this one, I think it was this pit here, had thousands of chenopodium seeds in it. And I want to say there were like over 1,000 maygrass seeds in it as well. Okay, so let's talk about Mississippian. And I'm not going to, for those of you who have heard me give the storytelling at Cahokia paper several times, I won't do that again. But I wanted to emphasize, of course, and thanks, Bill, for the beautiful painting that we're all going to, such talent. I mean, how cool is that? Okay, so yes, Cahokia is the center of the Mississippian world. Here's Cahokia, and Cahokia influences this big, huge area. But, somebody's got to feed Cahokia, and such as the farmers, I think, living at the Gehring Site. So here's that first wall trench structure that we found. And I want to point out how neat and tidy this is, with no road grader involved. But I like a neat and tidy excavation. And so this just focus on how neat and tidy this is, because it's going to get messy here in a second. So here's the wall trenches in plan view. Here's a profile of the wall trench. And there were pits in there. This particular little tiny pit here, oh gosh, it had, I'm going to say, I mean, I wanted this to be this little tiny feature here, I wanted this to be another Middle Woodland post. I really did. But it had thousands of pieces of corn in it. Can you explain this to me, Gail? So, I mean, the only thing people talk about smudge pits having, like, burning corn in a little tiny pit like that for smudging hides, but, like, why would you be smudging hides in your house? It doesn't make any sense to me. So, I will tell you right now that I'm going to be on sabbatical in spring of 2026, a year from now, and I'm going to write up the Mississippian stuff they found, so I will have figured all that out next spring. So wait for it. Maybe then you'll want me to come back and talk about the Mississippian stuff. I am also, as part of that, I'm gonna go out to Oklahoma and do consultation with tribes that I did not do in 2018. So now I have a lot more contacts in Oklahoma than I did then, and so I'm going to talk to Native Americans about what they think about the Mississippian occupation. And so, remember, I had, in the past when we've dug houses on other field schools, I regretted not putting people in the picture to give you an idea of how big they were. And if you're looking at this, if this is the first Mississippian wall trench structure you've seen, and you're like, oh, it's so tiny. I mean, it is pretty tiny, but this is actually pretty big for a Mississippian wall trench structure. It's like 5 by 7 meters. So that is big for a Mississippian wall trench structure. There are several storage pits in here, and here's that little tiny pit that was full of all that corn. And so here's the other one. So now it gets messy because remember, this was, we went through it in 2013 and didn't realize that there was a Mississippian house there. And we only recognized this wall trench underneath this pit several years later. I want to say, I don't even remember what year it is now. That says 2018. So 2016, 2018, I think we excavated it. So it took a long time to uncover this, and it got, so it's not nearly as good looking an excavation. But here's the wall trench. You can see it, and there's the profile of that wall trench. And now we're digging real deep because I want to make sure we don't miss anything else. Okay? So here's a picture of us all inside of it. So the basins for these wall trench structures are completely gone. There's like no evidence that the basin itself is there, even though it should have been something like, several feet deep at least. And so, there are Mississippian pits as well. But whereas these pits should have been like, at least a meter, maybe 2 meters deep, they're only this deep. And again, going back to the guy who collected the site in the 1970s, he told me from the first day, we were out there, he said, when I came out here in the 1970s to collect this field, I used to bring a ladder out. And I used to climb up. Remember the shape of the site's on looks like a little peninsula coming down. He said, I used to take my ladder over there and climb up to the site. And then they started horseradish agriculture, and it's just all washed away. So he told me way back in 2009 there was like 5 feet of topsoil loss. And this proves it. Like the Mississippian occupation it should be, those houses you should be stepping down into them, and they're gone. Right? These pits should be, let's say 5 feet deeper than this. All right. So, and that's become kind of a signature of how we know they're Mississippian pits, is because they're only this deep. You saw how much deeper the Middle Woodland pits were. And because they are so shallow, there's hardly any artifacts left in them. This is about the best collection of Cahokian artifacts, Mississippian artifacts we have from our features there. We've got shell-tempered pottery, the red paint, red slip still intact on this. I want to say this might be a seed pot, but don't quote me on that. These might be those little tiny holes that you find in seed pots, but I'm not sure. And little tiny, ugly Cahokia point. So that's about it that we have found down where we're working. But up where Greg Vogel worked, I mentioned he did find a burial up there. Uncovered it, covered it back up again. Reported, did the legally correct thing, reported it to the state, reported to the coroner's office, covered it back up again. This copper was from that burial, came from the plow zone that was reburied with the burial, even though this had come out of the plow zone. This little tiny owl effigy head is what he identified it as. It's about this big. I don't know if it's really an owl, but marine shell beads. So these are, the scenario I'm imagining is that these are farmers. And I don't think, the radiocarbon dates on these two, houses are, I'm going to say, oh gosh, I just looked up. One's 820 and the other one's 830, uncalibrated years BP. So that's approximately 1200. And, I believe this one's older because it's got more superpositioning, but I don't think they were occupied at the same time. It looks like this one is just a little bit older. So my model is, and Gail can argue with me. I've just read your book, Feeding Cahokia. I've had it sitting on my shelf for all these years, and I just read it. So you maybe want to argue with me, but I think these are farmers who are living there. They've got Cahokia Creek right there. They can fill up their canoes full of corn, just take it on down to Cahokia. And I don't think these two houses are occupied at the same time. I think they might be living there. And then when they decide they want to move, maybe because their soils are exhausted, and I know you might argue with that.
Jim Pleasant would argue with that.
So maybe they leave for 10 years and then come back. Okay. Just to give the soils a little bit of a rest, because they're not trying to make money like farmers today, maybe. I don't know. And so these are maybe farmers, but they do have, access to copper. They do have access to marine shell beads coming from, the Gulf. Did I say Gulf of Mexico? Yeah. The beads might be made at Cahokia, but the marine shell is coming from the Gulf of Mexico. This is a big, beautiful hoe that, is actually, most Mississippian hoes are made out of, Mill Creek chert from Southern Illinois, but this is actually made out of Burlington chert. And this came out of a house where the house basin was still present. So there is some stratigraphy up in the north part of the site. There's the potential there to get a better Mississippian sample from up there. And maybe Susan will get tired of working at the southern end and start working at the northern end, which would be closer to the field road. The problem is that I almost said Sid Denny, Greg Vogel also changed the grid. After I went out there, he went out and started a new grid, and we don't know exactly where his units were either. But we're trying to figure that out. This is from that private collection. It's a beautiful chunky stone. I believe this came down from the south end where we're working. Pretty sure of that. I'm going to have to double check with him. And so they're playing, ritual games like Cahokians. And I would love to tell you that we found these cool. So if you've heard me do this before, look at this cool stuff we found. Nope. So this is Liz Castley. Some of you know. Liz Castley found this little red flint clay figurine fragment at the Gehring Site. I'm not sure when off the top of my head, but she believed it was. I think Tom Emerson. He did zap this with his Pima portable infrared mineral analyzer gadget, and so it is red flint clay. I believe he reported it as like an elbow fragment or something like that, but Liz thought it was actually either from a frog such as this, right? Or this guy is like a frog. This is a shaman smoking a frog pipe who I think is transforming into a frog. I mean, I do yoga. My knee doesn't do that. Okay. So his knee does kind of, sort of almost do that like the frog. So anyway, so this is you don't find these red flint clay figurines everywhere. To have a fragment of it there, they were, these may have been farmers, but they were still, engaged in a ritual, Cahokian universe. Okay. 724. All right. So yeah, again, I want to emphasize, map was published in 2018 when I published the Middle Woodland stuff. I am going to go back now and do this Mississippian stuff and write that up next spring. But again, look at how tiny that little yellow area is. It's a very tiny part of the site. Susan Koyman did field school, like I said, starting in summer 2021, and she expanded this area. By the way, I did dig these pits here, and they're deeper, and I'm going to say I think they're late woodland. They've got a kind of ambiguous, generic-looking, boring late woodland pottery in them, I think. So I think these are late woodland, but we're not quite sure about that yet. So Susan opened up this area and found more pits here. This, I think, actually overlaps with that. Nope. Yeah, I think there's an updated version of this in a second. But she also, this is pretty remarkable. I didn't dig in this area right here, and she came out there and didn't find anything in there. The odds were against that, but those poor kids dug all summer, no road grader, and it was just like clay. It was yuck. Yeah, bummer. All right, am I going the wrong way now? Yes, I am. Oops. All right, so here, sorry, just a couple of the features that she has found. And again, like here, this one actually does have shell-tempered pottery in the top. Again, very shallow, so it's Mississippian. This one, she thinks could be late woodland, so I think the late woodland features are somewhere in between. All right, so here, this is updated. There was a Mississippian pit over here. All right, these we're not sure about. I say late woodland. Questions?
You sign up late woodland houses?
Nope. Not yet. So there was like a tooth fragment found down here. So I think when Susan goes back to dig in the future, I've convinced her to go this way, so that if there are any, I don't think there are any intact burials down at this end of the site, because we actually had remote sensing done, and somebody didn't do a report on the remote sensing, but there's no evidence of anything that looks like burial features remaining down at our end of the site. But nevertheless, if there are, if there's human bone fragments coming from down in that area, I want to avoid it. So we're going north next in future. All right, so you asked about plowing at the site. We went out there after it was no longer, it took like, a year or two to get permission and to get the money to do it. And we planted like several $1,000s worth of, we couldn't afford a complete prairie reconstruction because it's incredibly expensive. But we did spend a couple $1,000s on seed. We planted native wildflowers. You can see here, oh gosh, black-eyed Susan, gray-headed coneflower, and another one. It'll come to me. Wait for it. And but the grasses that we planted were non-native because we couldn't afford native prairie grasses. So the site's pretty well protected today. No one's collecting it anymore because it's too much work now because no one's plowing it anymore. All right. So once upon a time, when I gave this talk, I did all these acknowledgments, and it did not occur to me at the time to actually thank Native Americans who lived there before. So I want to go back to where we started, which is thinking about people acknowledgement, Native Americans who lived here for thousands of years, and we can talk about the genocidal Ninian Edwards, after whom the city of Edwardsville is named. When I say genocidal, I mean it, like wiping out villages of Kickapoo. Okay, so we have a tortured history that we need to acknowledge. And so we've created this land acknowledgement statement, and it's buried on the website. Who sees it? Some administrators pay attention to it, others do not. And so somebody who works over in our university center said, "Hey, why didn't you guys put up a display about Native Americans?" And I thought, what a great idea. So we did this as the entrance at the Morris University Center. We built this land acknowledgement display, and it's got the land acknowledgement up here on the sign. And I wanted artifacts in the display to indicate that Native Americans were not only here for thousands of years, but they are still alive, okay? I don't know about you all, but I grew up south of St. Louis, an hour from here, and I never met a Native American until I was, 40, okay? So Native Americans, yeah, well, maybe 50, maybe 60? No, I'm not there yet. So my point is that, Native Americans to me growing up were like a fantasy, something off of TV, and they are to a lot of people who live in this area because of the Indian Removal. And the Indian Removal Act was, you think Trail of Tears, that's 1830 or 33, I can't remember. But you saw those treaties even predate that, 1818 and 1819. Native Americans were already run out of Edwardsville, thanks to Ninian Edwards, sorry. Okay, so I wanted to put this figurine in the case, but the new NAGPRA regulations came out a year ago. For those of you who don't know, NAGPRA is the Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act, and it was passed in 1990, and they came out with new regulations just a year ago that there's museums scrambling to like covering up their displays and everything because they're not sure anymore what is to be. That the process has been so slow in returning human remains, engraved goods, and other objects of cultural patrimony that at this point they're really ramping up the process, and so museums have been covering stuff up because they don't know what they can display anymore. So that would be the worst possible time to put something on display and have a Native American come in and say, what is this? It didn't come out of a burial, right? But I wouldn't want somebody to say that this is a sacred object that we shouldn't be showing like on display like this. So we asked Susan Bostwick, who's the local potter, who made this out of clay. And I want to say it is by no means an exact replica. So if you go look at the little sign that's underneath it, it will say that it's made in the style of a Middle Woodland artifact that was found on the campus. So it's, again, by no means an exact replica, but it's in the style of that. So in response to that, again, I wanted something. So this is that piece is to show that Native Americans were here for thousands of years. All right. And in response to that, I asked a friend of mine, Kylan Jacobs, who is enrolled Osage. He's an artist who works for the Osage Tribal Historic Preservation Office. And I asked him, would you make a work of art in response to this? And he and his wife, Mary, who is Quapaw, they had seen this previously, and they're among the Native Americans who looked at it and laughed because they think it's cute. And they thought it was a kid's toy. And so their response piece was to make a cradle board. And this is obviously not a life-size cradle board. Even a baby, if they made a cradle board, they have 5 kids. You're going to see a picture of them in a second. If they made a cradle board, and they did keep their own kids in cradle boards when they were infants, and they make cradle boards for their friends who still use them. But they might also make a cradle board for their daughter's dowel, but their daughter's dowel would not be this big. So initially, I told him I needed to be 9 centimeters max to be to scale. And he, made something that was like, 3 times that size. And I'm like, no. Yeah. So this is a miniature toy cradle board. It's not even a toy cradle board. It's a miniature toy cradle board. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, here's a historic photograph. I mean, it's probably an Edward Curtis, but I don't remember. Here's a historic photograph of, I'm not sure if she's Osage or not. Baby in the cradle board. Here's the close-up of the cradle board that Kylan and Mary made. And Kylan will tell you, or Mary too, will tell you that, among the Osage, traditionally the men make the cradle board. The men do the painting, but the women do, that is the women's, right. It's not just like her job. It is her right to do the weaving. So Kylan made the board, and then Mary came and finished it with this weaving, finger weaving that you see on there. And so here's a picture of a contemporary one with a baby in it. And, I look at that, I'm thinking, Kylan may have actually, this is actually an Osage woman, and I wonder if Kylan actually made that, because he, like I said, they made them for their kids, and they make them for their friends' kids as well. So, they came up November 1st. This took several years to get this display done. And so November 1st, they came up, and this is actually Galen Gritz. Some of you may have met him. He's from the St. Louis area. He is enrolled Cherokee. His father was Franklin Gritz, was a painter. He was full-blood Cherokee, I believe his father was. But Galen has lived in St. Louis his whole life. So he came over and did the opening prayer for us. And then here's Kylan, and here's Mary, and their 5 kids, and they came and spoke as well about what the piece means to them, both the archaeological piece and the opportunity to make a response piece to that, and what it means to them to be here, to be in the home of their ancestors. Is very moving. But so I want to end with the highlight of the sign itself. So the beginning of my talk, the title was "You Are Standing on Native Land: 10,000 Years of Native American," whatever it said it on, whatever. Anyway, so you are standing on Native land. This is Erin Vignew Dimmick over here, my colleague from the University Museum at SIUE, and she, I'm going to tell you, I'm glue and crayon incompetent, so I do not design museum displays. So Erin did the primary display, design of the display itself. And so also she's got the artistic background that we worked together on the signage. And she doing the research and looking at other land acknowledgement displays, it was her idea to put the big bold print in there, "You are standing on native land." And I went to 12 years of Catholic school, right? I'm like, don't you think we'll get in trouble? I'm happy to tell you no, I'm not sure how many people notice it, but we haven't gotten in trouble for it. So here's the land acknowledgement statement that you already heard in the background. And then the big bold proclamation, "You are standing on native land." Up at the top here is a sky design from a Ramey, Mississippian Cahokia vessel. And then down at the bottom, the grasses to evoke the prairie that used to be here. And so that's our land acknowledgement display on the SIUE campus. If you visit, if you go to the Morris University Center, you'll see the big cougar outside the kind of the main door. Go into those doors there and you'll see it right inside there. So check it out. And I think that is all I got. Yeah, so 7:36. Questions?
That's beautiful.
Any questions?
Thank you. Oh, I want to point out the QR code. You see a little QR code? So I have figured out how you get college students to pay attention to what you're doing. Put a QR code on it. You noticed initially it didn't have the QR code, see? But then I was like, we need a QR code in there for these kids to pay attention. So when you go to if you scan that QR code, it will take you to the website that explains what it tells you what the statement's all about, why it exists, and also explains the pieces in there. The goal is to rotate, museum people, they like to rotate the displays. I'm like, are you kidding? That took 2 years. I am done. That is staying in there forever. Okay. So the goal is to put something else in there in the future. And I don't think I'm going to live that long. This is too exhausting.
Is Susan continuing work out there?
Susan will continue work out there. Like I said, not on the south side of where we've been working, but she was planning to move to the north edge of that. And if we can, I've got a grad student right now as a guy who got his BA with us, and then has been doing contract archaeology for over a decade and is now back doing his master's degree with us. And I think he's going to figure out, he actually did the field school with Greg Vogel in the summer of 2012 or something like that. And I think he's going to figure out where that grid was. And then maybe Susan will move up to the north end because, like I said, there's more stratigraphy still intact up there than we're finding.
What about the other sites in the campus that we on the bluff?
Yeah, that's
on the other side of the
yeah.
stadium?
Boy, it'll take us 5 times. To answer your no, well, I'll tell you, Michelle. So we also have. No, this is not moving. So it's like the pictures are too big. It does not want to go anywhere. To answer your question, there is a really big site to the southwest of the Gehring Site that it's so big it may actually be only partly on campus. So that is a potential future field school site. And the other sites that are on campus, like Sid dug, effectively, it's gone. Another site up on the bluff top. And the other sites that, like, there was one we tested in the summer of 2009 that was reported, and it looks like it was destroyed when they put a soccer field in. So I think at this point, since the university took the Gehring site out of production and they're protecting it, and I think the commitment is to protect that site and they want they want us to stay there. When I was new faculty, 20 years ago, I started teaching at SIUE in the fall of 2000. I was looking for a place to do my field school, and I went to our chancellor at that time and asked if I could, because Sid told me about the site way back then, and I asked him if I could do the field school there, and he's like, "Oh, I don't want to, interfere with our contract with the farmer." So he just said flat out no. And so some years later, if you saw the acknowledgement there, well, I'm not going back, it'll take too long. Ken Nair was our vice chancellor some years later, and he was actually an undergraduate anthropology major. And so he was talking to me about like, well, why don't you dig on campus? I'm like, that's a great question. I wanted to dig on campus because, you know, my experience before that was it was impossible to find local landowners to let us work on their properties. So, gosh, anyway, so yeah, I think we're committed to staying at the Gehring site. And it's so huge, you know, that, you know, Susan could be digging there for the rest of her career too.
How close are you to all the stuff that was at Pontoon Beach that all got destroyed when Interstate 270 or whatever came through?
I don't know specifically what you're talking about, but yeah, we're probably within a mile of 270. 255.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
The 270 went across by those warehouses.
yeah, I mean, we're kind of in between, you know, here's 270, here's 270, here's 255. We're up over in there.
What's that called?
Mark talking about the big mound site there.
Yeah, the big mound site. Mitchell. Yeah, Mitchell.
I mean, that's Granite City. We're a few miles from there.
Yeah. I mean, you've never gone over there to do stuff.
Mm-mm.
No, because it's probably all leveled off, plowed.
Yes, Gail?
Oh, there's still some of the
Yeah.
So it's right there by Cahokia Creek, so it's a floodplain, and so there was flooding. Was the land, you know, were the flood deposit, the alluvial deposits raising the surface, like in between Middle Woodland and Mississippian?
The collector actually thought, and I think he's correct, that there was like a big, and he was saying that there was a big flood like 2,000 years ago. That's what he thought based upon his collections. And that's consistent with what Henry Forty was saying about, like, you know, at the end of Middle Woodland period, the American bottom is abandoned for 50 years. So, I don't know why the Mississippi, so yeah, by the time Mississippians come, you know, the land surface is that much higher. Right? And you know what? Gosh, Sid said there was nothing. He acted like there was nothing there. But I couldn't have dug in the 1970s because again, I would have been this tall. But if you had dug there in the 1970s, you would have had an intact, unplowed Middle Woodland land surface. Would have been so freaking awesome. And if there had been the Middle Woodland house there, it would, you know, you would have found it. So, bummer. Anybody else?
Thanks again.
Okay, so when you guys have forgotten, I'll come back and tell you this all again.